Well, hello and welcome to another Café Insights, and this time at the Fullerton Hotel here in Singapore. And I'm in conversation with Vijay Vaitheeswaran, who's a senior correspondent and writer and author with the Economist newspaper, and based in China, but is visiting Singapore today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Vijay, you've covered a number of industries, looked at a number of industry developments over the course of your extensive career, including the automotive sector, healthcare, pharmaceutical, and the energy sector. The common theme that seems to run through your work, though, is being at the forefront of thinking about technological innovations. So I thought perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your work and how come you ended up in China, which is your remit now.
Sure. Innovation, I think, is what makes the world go round, but not necessarily in the way that some people think about it. In particular, not particularly in the way that technologists think about it. And I say this with great respect for technology. I'm an engineer from MIT myself. But innovation at heart is not about technology. It's not fundamentally about IP or patents or gadgets or gizmos. It's not even about PhDs and the number of engineers a country produces. All those things are very important, but they're inputs into a process. They're not the outputs. Innovation is about fresh thinking, which may or may not involve technology, that creates actual value in the marketplace. And the harder part of that innovation process and the challenge for managers is extracting that value for shareholders, for stakeholders, for community at large, for your employees. So fresh thinking that creates value. And I think the real value and message that I've distilled over 20 years at The Economist is seeing how often companies and even societies go wrong when they obsess over the easy part of innovation, which is idea generation and coming up with technologies, and don't focus as much on the harder bit, which is how do you make sure that this actually creates value.
Right. Because innovation seems to be a buzzword at the moment. A lot of people are throwing this around as going to be, this is the answer. Okay, that we're going through tremendous change, probably more change to come. It's going to take people doing things differently. And I think that's what people are saying. Whether they're going to be successful and whether they even realize what it means to be innovative. What kind of companies do you see being successful at this so far?
I think the ones that are successful are the ones that understand that we are living through one of those rare periods of time when the very ways in which we innovate are themselves being innovated. That is meta-innovation. The rules of innovation are themselves changing rapidly. We saw some of this with the Great Victorian Age of Invention 130 years ago, a period of extraordinary advances that laid the foundation for the 20th century's great advances, be that motor cars or grid electrification, modern chemistry. We see the arrival of many kinds of new sciences, genomics, proteomics, material science, of course, the big data revolution, and these are converging in very fascinating and disruptive ways. But to create value from this opportunity set, companies have to find new business models. We have to fundamentally rethink what corporations do. And sometimes it will be the disruptive outsider that's going to be able to capitalize on this, whether it's in the shape of a new business model from the bottom up, or it could be an emerging market that allows new ways for mind and money to connect with the marketplace.
I'm sure where companies are right is when they feel that they cannot be complacent and just sit back and assume that they can carry on doing what they've just done for the last 10 or 20 years, that this is a new game.
If you just look at the Fortune 500 list or the Standard & Poor's list in 1950, 1980, and look at it today, most names are gone. They don't exist. So if you're an existing company that thinks you're successful, has profits, guess what? You're a diminishing asset. And it's very likely that the Fortune 500 will be made up within 10, 15 years with names that most of us have never heard of, probably from countries most of us don't think of.
Well, just take automobiles. They're named because of the engines that were designed for them in the first place. Well, if all the technology to drive vehicles and mobility changes, it could be a Chinese battery company, potentially, or I don't know what. It could be some other organization that you've never heard of that suddenly becomes the world's biggest mobility company.
That's absolutely right. In fact, one of my previous books was called Zoom, about the future of the motor car and oil, where I argued with my co-author that these two great industries, autos and car and oil, are headed for divorce after 100 years of wonderful synergy. And what comes next is one of the great areas of exploration. I think that future is being writ large around the world, often, again, by companies that are not the names you and I would know off the tip of our tongues.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about your new book, which was just released in March this year, very successfully, and it has a fantastic title, Need, Speed, Greed. The full title is even more delicious, How Innovation Can Transform Businesses, Propel Nations to Greatness, and Tame the World's Most Wicked Problems. Now, that is really a fantastic title for a book and just makes you want to pick it up. But there are three distinct areas there. It's clearly, as we started to talk about how businesses can transform, I'm kind of interested to see, especially with you now living and working in Hong Kong and China, what you think in terms of which nations are going to be greatest in terms of embracing this, and how we rise to the challenge that human beings are going to face, especially with the environment.
Well, this is really one of the great challenges today. I think in the early days of the century, we are at a time of unprecedented global challenges. Yeah. And the ones that the Western world has been working on are not the most important ones. Since the turn of the century, many parts of the world have been working on the war on terrorism, as it's been called in the U.S., post 9/11, and also the global financial crises, the endless series of bankruptcies of Enron, Lehman, and so on. These seem like the most difficult global crises imaginable. They are important, but they're not the most difficult challenges. Right. When we actually look at a 100-year sweep of history, we're in an age of unprecedented urbanization, the demographic shifts that accompany that. We're in an aging of the global population, especially in China, which is getting much older before it gets richer. The burden of chronic diseases, but also our hyperconnectivity is leading to an incredible challenge of infectious diseases and pandemics. We are not even beginning to deal with these threats. So this is an extraordinary age of challenges. That's the need part of my thesis. Of course, climate change can be added to that, and water, the resources crunch, the list goes on and on. But I'm not a naysayer or a doom-monger. I'm actually a bit of an impatient realist, because counterbalancing the need is the speed at which innovation is being transformed, creating opportunities for those companies and individuals who get it, who learn the new rules of innovation and capitalize on these opportunities. And that's what a lot of my book talks about with frontline reporting. Because as a journalist, I have the opportunity to get to sit inside companies, interview not only the chairman, but also start with entrepreneurs and get into business models and debunk them as appropriate. So I've been able to see it firsthand how, for example, some of the new rules of innovation, you need to move nimbly, you need to open wisely, you need to fail gracefully. These are among the things that successful innovators will do in this new age. And the ways you do them, for example, through open, network, user-driven models of innovation, are rapidly evolving. Right. And it really repays the entrepreneur or chief executive paying close attention to how innovation is changing.
And do you think the West, and in particular the States, still has the comparative advantage in this area?
I think there's no doubt that the United States remains the Goliath of value-creating innovation, both in terms of the supply of new innovation. We can always think about Silicon Valley having invented multiple industries of the future in the last 30 years, but also something called venturesome consumption, being an economy that's willing to take risks on new products, new business models, give new retailers a try. In both those areas, we can hold up other nations, and we may find things lacking. Yeah. However, the big new thing under the sun is a wonderful kind of dynamism coming up from emerging markets, where you see frugal engineering, for example, new ways of connecting not only resources but also to markets that typically gold-plating Western companies find it hard to copy. And so you are finding new ideas on how to innovate coming up. And sometimes it's not just cheap and cheerful. In China and India, you're finding these innovators coming up with cheaper and much better ways of doing things, really leapfrogging innovations. And that's something to watch.
Well, I know a lot of people are still very optimistic about economies like the States because they just believe that the DNA is basically right there in terms of being innovative, being prepared to take risk as well, and don't write off the economies of the West. But what we're also seeing is China being impatient to go up the value chain, not get caught as a middle-income kind of country, really take the lead in terms of developing the next generation of technology or design or whatever it happens to be. Is China going to catch up, do you think?
Well, what's clear is that we're at the end of cheap China.
Right.
We see that there are many, many indicators showing that the cheap coastal provinces that used to be the workshop to the world can no longer afford to do that at the low price. And that's not going to be replaced by interior China, which has too many logistical problems in getting stuff to the world, nor will it be replaced by Vietnam or Indonesia or India, which have many other complications. For example, lack of a proper supply chain or corruption or various other problems. So the world is stuck with a more expensive China. Now, does this mean that China will therefore move up the value chain successfully and innovate? That's what the Chinese want.
Yes.
I think it remains an open question. Those who claim that China is already the innovation leader in the world, I think they need to look a little bit more closely at the evidence. China has a long way to go. It does have some things right. It provides good support for technology, science, engineering. It's able to have a broad base of consumption within its markets. If you look at, for example, internet commerce, in many ways, China is leading the world in the ways that the internet is developing. And so there are areas for it to lead the world in innovation. But when it comes to risk-taking, when it comes to openness, when it comes to risk finance, like venture capital or angel investing, there are a number of areas. Like bankruptcy code, for example, a resilient bankruptcy code is one of the main reasons the U.S. entrepreneurial sector has been able to flourish, whereas that's not yet the case in China. I think there are areas that need to be shored up, and they can be in time.
And then finally, the last thing about solving our wicked problems. I mean, the most wicked of all, and I think the time is ticking really rapidly, so I'm kind of glad to hear that you're an impatient realist. Are you optimistic that we can actually solve our own problems?
Well, it's a great race. The great race has always been between development on one hand, with economic growth, profits, the chance for progress, poverty alleviation, and on the other hand, degradation of the natural systems of our whether it be climate or water or other resources. And this has always been the story of mankind. What's different now in this new century is that the consequences are not just local, they're planetary.
Yes.
The kinds of problems that we now face may have irreversible triggers, as, for example, in the case of climate change. And that would leave not just a local mess that can be cleaned up by our wealthier grandchildren. That's typically what happened in the history of economic progress. It's now that there may be problems of our voraciousness, leaving an uninhabitable planet for our children. So I think the challenge is great, but I really do believe that living in an age of invention and innovation as great or greater than what came in the Victorian age 130 years ago, the opportunity is there for us to seize it. Doesn't mean we will. We might make the wrong choices, but part of why I've written a book, Need, Speed, and Greed, and why I'm on the stump sometimes advocating companies to think hard about this, is that the winners will be those who learn the new rules of innovation and help us forge that brighter future.
Well, this is fascinating. We could talk to you for all day, I think. But Vijay, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.